Bitcoin getting crushed again. It is now off 16% since hitting all-time highs earlier this month.
But the bank also pointed to tens of billions of pounds in extra savings by households who have not been able to spend, but at some point could be unleashed. Another much-needed shot in the arm.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of Focus on Finance. In today's episode, we look at trade and industry. We examine the various types of companies that exist in the economy and issues around workers' rights. Joining me in the studio once again, we have Niazi Hoolash, an accountant by profession, and Shameem Jamal Ahmad, a missionary based in Mauritius. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
So let me start with Niazi. Please explain to us a little bit about the types of companies that exist.
Thank you, Shafique. Across the world, in different countries, there are various types of companies. So if we have to take it, we have first to understand what is the purpose of a company. So a company is merely a legal entity whereby a person or a group of persons can carry out a certain activity, either for profit or non-for-profit. So, for instance, the simplest form of a company you can have is a sole trader. So a sole trader who incorporates a company and they are the only shareholder and director of that company. Now, why do people go and create a company as opposed to operating directly in themselves? There are a host of fiscal reasons and legal reasons why they would do that. The main one being the separation of the person himself or herself and the activity, the business activity they want to carry out. So in a company, if you're a sole trader, you can have a company which is limited by liability, which means that at the end of the day, if the company owes certain money, then in some way they're not able to pay it, so it is the company and not the director or the shareholder who is liable for that necessarily. There are other circumstances as well. Let's say a company is providing a certain service and the service is faulty and basically you have the client suing the person. They can't sue the owner, they will sue the company. So there are many reasons why they can do that. Now, companies, you've got sole traders, you've got limited liability partnerships, like people coming together. They are partners in a business and they have that liability limitation. You've got public limited companies as well. Companies who, as we spoke in the recent program on the stock exchange, which are listed on stock exchanges, whereby the public at large can have shares and own parts of the company. Mm-hmm. You have large private companies, at times you call them public interest enterprises, and these companies are called public interest enterprises by virtue of the fact that they are so large or have a large number of employees that their continuity, their existence, their well-being actually is a matter of public interest. So that is in essence the type of companies. We can go in further details like protected cell companies or SPVs, etc., global business companies, local companies, but in essence, the key principle is that companies basically exist so that you can separate ownership of the persons from the actual activity of the company. And finally, if we can summarize, we can say a company is the sum total of all the people owning it, employees working for it, the clients they serve, and the suppliers who supply them with whatever they need to conduct their activity.
So it's a legal entity. I think there's a lot of words there that people may not fully understand. Fiscal, liability, separation. Perhaps let's bring back with some concrete examples. So if we take an example of a plumber. Yeah. So he's a single person doing some work. How would he be different from a company?
All right. Let's call, to use a common example, Joe the plumber. Okay. All right, so Joe the plumber goes to fix plumbing at Mr. Smith's house. So he goes there and he charges $100 to fix the plumbing. Now, Mr. Smith would pay him $100, and on his $100, he would pay maybe a certain amount of taxes, etc. It is Joe the plumber. Now, Joe the plumber might be incurring his household expenses. He might be driving his car to go there. Now, what part of the expense will be deductible or not? It has to be strictly related to the business. At times, it becomes difficult to differentiate what is a personal expense from what is a business-related expense. If tomorrow they fix the plumbing and Joe the plumber said, you know what, you should be good for a year, and after 1 month, there's a leak again, the person is going to sue Joe the plumber directly. And now Joe the plumber might, at that point in time, not have sufficient money to pay or have other financial commitments, and he might not be in a position to fix the issue. However, if it is a company, basically the person would sue the company, and we're not in any way suggesting that Joe should ignore it because it's the company. But the fact of the matter is that separation of entity, of identity between the company and him. So that would be one of the reasons, the main differences between Joe as an individual and Joe as a company. Now, Joe as a company can decide that he wants to grow his business because business is good. He might employ other people under the company.
But would Joe, let's say, as we call him, self-employed, is a self-employed person a company?
Not necessarily. A self-employed person can be a company if they structure themselves as a company with one person only. But so it can be both.
Okay. Then there are, so at the other extreme, you have these multinationals. You have tech like Alphabet, who make Google, etc., Microsoft, Coca-Cola. These are brands, these are companies.
Yes.
And these are, but then we have partnerships. Would they form part of the company spectrum?
Well, it could be or not. So basically, today you have the concept of limited liability partnerships. To make it simple, let's take, if three partners, let's say the three of us, we invest equally $100 each into a certain venture, right? So we are equal partners. If the venture goes awry, then what's going to happen is that we're going to bear the costs. We're going to lose our money, etc. If we invest 300, let's say, into a plumbing company, and being the good plumbers we are, we actually don't do a great job out of it, and we get sued. So let's say we get sued not only for the $300 that we spent or the client paid us, etc., but because the pipe burst, we messed up all the carpets and the air conditioning and the heating in the house, and we are sitting with a claim of $1,000. Guess what? It's $333 each that we're going to be forking out of our pockets to make good the claim. However, if we were in a limited liability partnership, right, which is a mechanism available today, right, our liability technically, legally would be up to the limit of what that partnership would have has as money. However, limited liability partnerships often has a requirement whereby one of the partners has to assume unlimited liability. And this is how a limited liability partnership differs from a company.
Okay. So some specific things in the world of finance and business. Turning to Murabi Shameem Sahib, we've heard about companies, they do business, they employ people. What does Islam have to teach us about companies?
Well, actually, Islam has given us many various principles, especially when it comes to people employing others. You know, the basic, most of the companies, they have like hundreds and thousands of employees. So what is the role and responsibility of the employer and the role and responsibilities of the employees? And today we see how if we don't follow those principles, well, ultimately the whole company is going to be affected. And this is what we see today. Maybe Niazi Sahib will speak on that later. How, you know, the companies are, you know, going bankrupt. Why? Because some of those very basic principles regulating, you know, the relationship between the employees and the employers are not being properly, you know, followed. For example, basically, when you speak of wages nowadays, you know, exploitation, you know, especially in emerging countries, is something which is so common. So the Holy Quran has laid down very simple principle concerning wages if you want to employ someone. So how should you pay him? The word that the Holy Quran uses is bil ma'ruf. That is the wage the salary that is fixed should be such that the employee can have a decent life. It should be according to the financial reality of the country, of the economy of the country. And thirdly, which is very important and something that normally nowadays we ignore, Islam says that if the employer can do more, then he should do so. If he can reduce his own share just to give, the employees a better standard of living, he should do so. And nowadays we have, emerging companies, modern companies, going towards that. They see that to invest in the workforce is actually a very valuable investment, and productivity increases because they are taking care of the employees. The Holy Prophet ﷺ, has given us very beautiful example, simple example, but very beautiful one when it comes to wages and salaries. It says, first of all, you should not give your worker a burden that he cannot carry. And today, if we go nowadays, we can see it's a main concern that the workers and the employees in companies, they are being overburdened, completely burned out, no work-life balance. The Holy Prophet said, you should not, overburden the worker. If you do so, you should help him in, lifting that, sharing that burden. And this is something, unfortunately, these days we don't see, or we are seeing less and less. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ also said that you should pay your employee before his sweat dries up, referring to manual work. But actually this means that when it is time to pay and to reward, the workers for their hard work, then you should not hesitate in doing so. This is basically one or two, of the principles relating to, the employee and the employer, especially concerning wages and salaries, which is very basic, one of the most important thing to look at when you speak of companies.
Yeah. Now, in secular speak, what we've been talking about is industrial relations in a way, trade union, workers' rights versus owners. One peculiar thing which I'd like to explore with you about companies, especially limited companies, is this what they call the agency problem, which in a nutshell is you have the owners of a company, which in terms, as we heard in the stock market program, are the shareholders. Then you have the workers who do the work and generate the wealth. Then you have the managers, the CEOs and so on, who are not owners of the company. And what we are seeing today is a struggle between the workers, the managers who don't own the company but control the workers, whether they are working according to Islamic principles for the benefit of the workers or they are working for the benefit of the shareholder. What does capitalism in classical terms have to say about that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Shafique. In fact, there's one key point in the law which at times gets misunderstood or people pass over it. In a company, the persons legally responsible for a company are the directors, not the shareholders. That is the first thing. And second, the director's responsibility is towards the company, not the shareholders. That is a fact of how legal systems are. Now, reality is that because shareholders are appointing the directors, they would appoint directors who would be sympathetic to their objectives, which often is to get the maximum dividend. But the company does not exist by law to pay dividend. It exists to evolve, and it exists to be perennial in many cases. And of course, dividends have to be paid, but that ought not to be the prime objective of the directors. It's towards the company. Now, with this premise, what we find is that in reality, we take the very large multinationals. Often, many large multinationals would have, you would find CEOs who probably were the founders and they went big. If you look at Facebook, for instance, what the largest shareholder is actually the gentleman who owns Facebook. If you look at Alphabet, the founders are still the major shareholders. If you look at Apple today, one of the major shareholders is still the wife of Steve Jobs. So, but they are not the ones always managing the company. So when you have that separation, what you find is that there is a struggle because management have their own agenda. Yes, the boards control the CEO and the strategy. They appoint the CEO, they control the CEO. It is the CEO's job to execute the strategy or advise and execute on the strategy of the company. And the CEO is normally the one answerable to the board, who then answers to the board of directors. Now, where do the workers come in there? So obviously, let's take the example of a company where there is a certain profitability target. How do you achieve this profitability target? You can either control costs. You decide that, okay, all right, I'm going to freeze salaries. I'm not going to increase salaries because that is a way I'm going to make sure I achieve our profitability targets. The other way to do it, and my personal view, which is the more sustainable and logical way to do it, is of course you've got to control costs. So long these costs are waste, this has to be controlled, but focus the energy and invest into people if needed, and often it is needed, to increase the revenue. Maybe through better productivity, through exploring new markets, new research and development, new inventions, etc. So you make your company stronger, and because you increase your market share, you increase your revenue. As a result, everyone is better off for that matter. Now, you have the concept of trade unions, depending on the various countries as well, whereby what we find is that in Anglo-Saxon, or like in the US and the capitalists, trade unions don't tend to be very strong. But if you look at countries which are more of a Latin, they say like France or the countries like Finland, etc., or some other countries.
Germany, for example.
Germany, etc. Trade unions tend to be a bit stronger. Now, are trade unions good or not? I think we have to look at it from the lens of what trade unions are meant to be. Trade unions are an emanation of the industrial age, whereby workers' rights had to be protected. Today, in modern economies, yes, I would say that workers' rights have to be protected, for sure. There are laws which have evolved to protect the employees as to protect the employers, but essentially what we find is more common is you motivate employees through giving things like performance bonuses, etc. So coming to what Shameem said, is that one of the ways to incentivize people is say, all right, this is your basic pay, but if you achieve a certain performance target, we'll pay you more money. And we find that this can be, depending on the industries, a great motivation for the employees as well. So by and large, yes, it is a struggle between management, board, employees, because their objectives are not necessarily aligned in the short term. But if we look at long term, it pays for everyone to have their objectives aligned, because if in the long term it is the sustainability of the company, the continued profitability, then everyone, I think it is possible to have the objectives of everyone aligned as far as possible, and this would ensure that the existence of the company would be perennial.
I think there's always the theory and the practice. I think when you look at it, there is the Anglo-Saxon model, but there is also the Islamic principles that we've heard of, that the employer needs to take consideration and sacrifice for the workers, if
also
possible.
We have the other side of the coin. Like if on one side the employer is respecting his side of the contract and abiding to the principles, investing in the employees. On the other side, and unfortunately today, this is what really impacts on productivity. You don't see the employees really, investing how they should be doing it into the company, and this impacts on everyone at the end of the day. So the Holy Quran has spoken about that as well. That if you're an employee and you find that, well, the employer has done his share of the job and has respected his share of the contract, then you should do that as well. You should work diligently. You should work hard. The Holy Quran said, وَأَوْفُوا بِالْعَهْدِ إِنَّ الْعَهْدَ كَانَ مَسْئُولًا. That the contract you sign with the employer, it's a contract, it's a covenant, it's a pact, and God is going to ask you about that. Not only about the religious obligations, but also about the professional obligations, that we as a Muslim, we have to be sincere and honest in our work. And unfortunately, this is one of the biggest concern we find today. People are going to work, but they don't really care about the work. They just do it because they know they're going to get a salary at the end of the month. And this ultimately impacts on productivity. The Holy Quran and Islam warns us that this is not the right way for a Muslim. No, you should do your work. You should work hard. You should work diligently. You should be honest in how you work, and you respect your contract. And if both sides, the employees and the employer, they do their part of the job right, and this ultimately, like Nisab said, will, when all those objectives are aligned and they understand their role within the company, so this ultimately will benefit the company itself.
There's a concept of justice, I think, that comes through from this. What people feel is justified and they're not less happy with, but they can live with it, they can understand it. I wanted to touch on even in the Western economic environments, there are two broad families of doing business. I think the Scandinavian way of doing and the German and French ways, it's more empowering for the workers. And what we are seeing in many discussions between workers and employers, and also economists are looking at it, is the multiple of your average salary to what the CEO is earning. And I think in some jurisdictions, they're having to publish this alongside other metrics such as how many women you have, how many women are in management positions. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Scandinavian and other countries, they have a smaller multiple, where the lowest paid is only earning 5 or 6 times less than the CEO. There is more contentment than we see in big American companies, where the lowest paid can be earning hundreds of times or thousands of times less than the top. In countries, you have a Gini coefficient. But what we're seeing now is, once you publish, they're sort of shamed. Why is the CEO earning $1 million, so whereas the lowest paid? What is your view on bringing down this differential?
Well, I have personally a mitigated view on that, and I'll tell you why. I think definitely the premise from which the countries like Germany, Finland, etc., are putting these laws in place, these regulations in place, is, I think, lofty. Okay, because what we want to do is to make sure that everyone has a decent wage. We want to make sure that women have equal opportunities, like equal pay for an equal job, which makes total sense from an Islamic, including from an Islamic viewpoint. And it is true that when you look at the index of happiness, Finland is probably one of the, and Sweden, Norway, are some of the happiest countries in the world. And when you analyze why, you find that basically there is that wage gap, which is limited. There are effective social services from the government, quality education, quality health, etc. The taxes you pay are high. You've got a progressive taxation system, but in the end, people are well catered for. So ultimately, what it means is that people are in a position to have a decent life. People are in a position to see a future for their kids, and there is competition, of course. It doesn't mean it stifles competition, but at least you're taking care, you have that safety net for those at the lower rungs of the ladder, in form of respect.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think Finland, or one of the Scandinavian countries, the tax authorities publishes everyone's salaries online. So anyone can look up at anyone's salary and how much they're earning, what their tax returns are. And that has brought people...
It is the case in Finland, as far as I know, and increasingly across the world, there is a push to publish the salaries of all the key management personnel. And that is something which basically the IIRC, okay, the International Institute for Integrated Reporting, is pushing, that you need to publish that. So, and in the capitalist societies, the USA, yes, you would say what the salary of the CEO is, because that's illegal, you have to publish what it is, but there are mechanisms by which they might hide it, etc., and there's no regulation. It's a total deregulation. I think total deregulation has got certain advantages, but I think by and large, it is proven that on the public at large, there are more disadvantages. This is not to say that there are not people who are not different. There is that card company in Seattle, a chap called Dan Price, who was the CEO, and it's an owner-run business, 120 employees. He was taking a pay cut of $1 million a year, and he decided 6 years ago that he's going to put give everyone a minimum salary of $70,000 and he put his salary at that level as well. And as a result, the company has grown multifold. And since he's the major shareholder, he makes the money out of dividends. But in a way that is proof that when you empower people, and that's a bold move, it remains to be seen how many CEOs today or owners would decide to cut their salary, put it at the same level as the employees, at a minimum level, and everyone works. So these examples are rare, but when they do happen, you see that they can be very successful. It requires a leap of faith, but these things are there for us to see, and we can see what the effect is.
A leap of faith, I think this is what Islam teaches.
Just to add on what, mentioning those who have the highest happiness index, and surprisingly, as I mentioned about healthcare, education, food, shelter, and basically this forms part, at the very basis of Islam's, economic model, that whatever society you wish to, to develop, the basic needs of people should be catered for. So the salary you are giving to people, and this is where we have a question mark on the gap. The gap might be there, but the minimum should be at least that the basic needs of people are fulfilled. And unfortunately, these days, even in US, a big debate about the medical bills and stuff. This is why we have this discontentment nowadays, because the basic needs of people are not being fulfilled. And this is what Islam teaches us. And countries like Finland and Sweden, who goes along that line, they find that, yes, generally in the society, people are happy with what they are earning and with what they are doing.
So we find ourselves running out of time once again. Very interesting program, lots more we could talk about in terms of companies. Thank you very much to my studio guests, Niazi, Hoolash, Shameem, Jamal, Ahmad, Jazakumullah. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and we hope to see you at the next episode of Focus on Finance. Assalamu alaikum.